January 14, 1991.
Détroit, Michigan. The wind howled like a warning outside the cracked hospital windows.
Snow fell in furious swirls, coating the city in a cold silence that even the sirens couldn't pierce. Inside room 204 of a county hospital, Denise Walker, barely 20 years old, gripped the bed rails and screamed through another contraction. Sweat drenched her brow despite the chill, and fear clutched her chest tighter than the pain. "You're doing good, Denise. One more push," the nurse urged, glancing at the flickering overhead lights. A scream tore from Denise's throat, followed by a thin, sharp cry. Then another. 2. The room fell still for a moment. The nurse blinked, stunned. The doctor frowned and leaned in to look more closely at the newborns. Denise barely had the strength to lift her head. "Are they okay?" she whispered. "They're healthy," the doctor said carefully. "But different."
The nurse wrapped the babies in hospital blanket.
Their skin was a deep caramel brown, just like Denise's, but their hair was snow white, soft and light like dandelion fuzz. Their eyelashes shimmered pale silver under the fluorescent lights. One of them opened her eyes, and a strange glowing gray stared back at the room. "What's wrong with them?" Denise asked, her voice trembling. "Albinism," the doctor said gently. "They're perfectly normal, just genetically unique. But they'll be sensitive to light and may face some challenges."
The door slammed open.
Marcus Johnson, Denise's boyfriend, stumbled in smelling like cheap beer and stale sweat. "I made it," he said, panting. Then his eyes landed on the twins.
The L is 10.
Denise tried to smile.
Toi, Marcus.
2 girls. They're beautiful.
Marcus looked, sharp, bitter.
Beautiful? What kind of joke is this?
Ain't nobody in my family go tire like that.
You been messin' with some white boy? No, she whispered. They're yours. He punched the wall so hard the nurse jumped.
Don't lie to me. You hear me?
They ain't mine.
Freak babies.
And just like that, he left. Denise watched his muddy boot prints streak across the sterile hospital floor as the cold rushed in behind him. That night, Denise didn't sleep. She held the girls, one in each arm, and stared at the ceiling. She named them without thinking. Ava, she whispered to the one with wide, curious eyes. Nova, to the one who barely made a sound, already so still. She kissed their foreheads and whispered, "Don't let this world break you." But the world was already waiting outside. 3 days later, Denise stood in front of a red brick building with boarded-up windows and a crooked cross above the entrance.
Hopewell Shelter, the faded sign read.
A nun answered the door, surprised to see a young woman clutching 2 infants wrapped in a thin blanket. I just need help until I get on my feet," Denise said, her voice shaking.
"You'll come back.
I promise." The nun reached out and gently took the babies.
Denise hesitated.
Her arms felt empty before she even let go. By morning, she was gone. All she left behind was a note tucked inside the blanket. "Please love them for me." The sisters grew up within the chipped walls and flickering lights of Hopewell Shelter. Winters were brutal. Blankets were thin. They learned to walk on icy tile floors, holding each other's hands to keep warm. When they laughed too loud, someone always told them to quiet down. When they sat in the sun, the other children whispered, "Ghost babies."
Weird angels.
Are they cursed? The staff tried to shield them, but words are blades children wield too easily. Ava and Nova learned early that being different meant being alone. At 4 years old, Ava asked a volunteer, "Why don't we look like them?" The woman hesitated.
Because God made you special.
Nova didn't ask questions. She drew in the dust on the windowsills, shapes of women with white hair and soft hands. Sometimes, she'd say she remembered their mother. Ava never corrected her. They clung to dreams when reality offered no comfort. Birthdays came and went.
Nos visiteurs. Nos présents.
Sometimes, families would come to adopt. They always smiled politely, but their eyes paused too long on the twins, then drifted away. "They're beautiful," one woman once whispered to her husband, "but how would we explain them?" Ava stopped waiting after that. Nova didn't. Years passed. They grew tall, elegant, with the same haunting features that once frightened strangers. They moved like shadows, always together. Never quite seen, never fully touched. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. A local photographer named Julian Michaels visited Hopewell for a charity calendar. He found the twins sitting by a window, where the late afternoon light haloed their white hair like crowns. "Don't move," he said instinctively, raising his camera. One click.
A moment frozen in time. Two girls, skin like copper, hair like snow, eyes like storm cloud, pressed close with entwined.
The photo ran in the Detroit Free Press under the headline, "The Angel Twins of Hopewell Shelter." Within days, donations poured in. Letters arrived from Chicago, Toronto, even London. Some called them miracles. Others called them living art. A few called them proof of God. Ava read one letter aloud.
"You give me hope.
I didn't know beauty could look like this." Nova smiled. "Maybe we're finally being seen." Ava folded the letter carefully, but didn't answer. She looked out the window, toward a world she still didn't trust. Because being seen was not the same as being known. Being admired was not the same as being loved. She didn't know that across the city, in a small apartment above a laundromat, Denise Walker dropped her coffee cup when the newspaper landed on her doorstep. She stared at the front page, at the girls she had once held against her chest in the dark.
En shook.
Her knees buckled. "My babies," she whispered. But it was already too late to turn back. And this was only the beginning. The photo changed everything. A week after the image of Ava and Nova appeared in the Detroit Free Press, Hopewell Shelter's office was flooded with phone calls, emails, and media requests. Donations poured in. Strangers sent toys, clothes, and letters praising the girls' beauty, their uniqueness, their divine presence. For the first time in their lives, Ava and Nova weren't invisible, they were unforgettable. But attention is a currency that spends fast. The staff at Hopewell tried to shield them, but the spotlight was relentless. People weren't interested in who they were, only what they looked like.
Then, one afternoon, Sofia Delgado walked through the shelter doors.
She wasn't a reporter. She wasn't a donor. She was a photographer, tall, graceful, with deep brown eyes and a camera slung over her shoulder. Her roots traced back to Puerto Rico, but she'd grown up in the Bronx, hustling between gallery openings and social justice campaigns. She had seen the photo, like everyone else. But unlike the others, she hadn't just seen the girls' faces, she had seen their silence. "They look like they're holding their breath," she'd said to a colleague. "Like the world's never given them permission to exhale." Now, standing before them in Hopewell's common room, Sophia knelt to their level. "I'm not here to take your picture," she said softly. "I'm here to see if you'd let me tell your story." The twins stared at her. Nova tilted her head, curious. Ava looked away. Sophia kept coming back.
Every Sunday.
Sometimes with paints and canvases, other times with scrapbooks of fashion shows, or short stories she'd written as a girl. Over time, the sisters began to open up. Nova asked questions. Ava listened. Sophia taught them Spanish phrases, the names of artists and poets, the language of light and shadow.
She called them mi estrella, my star.
When she applied for adoption, the process took nearly a year. The staff at Hopewell cried quietly the day the papers were finalized. Ava and Nova left the shelter in matching wool coats that Sophia had sewn herself. For the first time, they owned something that wasn't second-hand.
Brooklyn was nothing like Detroit.
It was loud, chaotic, alive. The subway rumbled beneath their feet. Their apartment smelled like roasted coffee and paint thinner. The windows faced the East River, and at night, the city lights flickered like stars trying to break through. Sophia enrolled them in a small arts-focused charter school, where their differences were embraced, not erased. Ava took to sketching. She filled journals with abstract shapes and faceless women in flowing gowns. Nova discovered her love for movement, joining the school's modern dance group, spinning across stages with a fire no one could ignore. But even in a city as diverse as New York, their appearance drew stares.
On the subway, strangers whispered.
In school, teachers sometimes spoke slower to them, assuming their albinism came with cognitive delays. Sophia defended them fiercely, but the girls learned to defend themselves too, each in their own way.
Nova grelottait. Boldée.
She laughed too hard, spoke too fast, refused to let anyone look away.
À vacheron qu'un war.
She smiled politely, but her eyes stayed guarded, her sketchbook always between her and the world. When they turned 16, Sophia's friend, a stylist named Malik, invited them to be part of a fashion editorial called Rare is Beautiful. It was supposed to be a small project, a photo spread for an independent magazine. But once the images were published, the industry took notice. Suddenly, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. By 17, they were walking in Fashion Week. By 18, they had become the faces of a new global campaign celebrating diversity in beauty.
Ava N. Nova Walker. The Angel Twin of Brooklyn. The face of the future.
People saw them as symbols, of inclusion, of uniqueness, of hope. But symbolism is a heavy crown to wear. Ava hated photo shoots. The flashes made her nauseous. She wore sunglasses indoors, not to look cool, but because her eyes burned constantly. She once told Sophia, "They don't see me. They see the story they want to tell." Nova thrived in the spotlight. She memorized interview answers, posed effortlessly, smiled with perfect teeth and practiced charm. When fans stopped them on the street, she always said yes to selfies. Ava would drift behind, half present. One night, after a campaign launch party in Soho, Ava pulled off her heels in the back of a black car and stared out the window. "You ever wonder if we're just someone's project?" she asked. Nova was scrolling through Instagram. "What do you mean?" "Like, we were abandoned, then adopted, then turned into this brand. Do you ever wonder who we would have been if none of it happened?" Nova put down her phone. "You mean if Mom never left us?" Ava didn't answer. They didn't say her name.
Not out loud.
Denise Walker existed like a shadow, part of their origin, but not their present. Sophia never pushed them to talk about her. But sometimes, Ava caught her looking at them with a sadness that was hard to explain. When they turned 19, Sophia sat them down. "I'm proud of everything you've accomplished," she said. "But I want to make sure you're doing it because you want to. Not because the world expects you to." Ava nodded. Nova smiled. But inside, both were already drifting. The world praised them for being unique, but neither of them felt whole. They had been transformed into icons, but the little girls from Hopewell, the ones who huddled under a thin blanket, whispering dreams into the dark, felt farther away than ever. And somewhere not far from the city, in a small apartment above a laundromat, Denise Walker watched them from afar. Magazine covers, interviews, television appearances. Her daughters, radiant and untouchable. She kept a box beneath her bed. Inside were letters she had written but never mailed. Articles she had cut out but never shared. Photos she had taken with a disposable camera the night they were born.
En trembled when she touched the paper.
She had promised to come back. But shame is a quiet prison. She hadn't just left them once. She had left them every day after. And now they belonged to a world she couldn't reach.
The col camon à rainy morning inlet marche.
Ava was sketching by the window, half listening to a lo-fi playlist while the city outside drowned in drizzle. Nova was in the kitchen, reheating leftover Thai food. Neither of them noticed the vibration of Sophia's phone on the counter, until it didn't stop. When Ava answered, she didn't recognize the voice.
Just the tone.
It was the kind of voice that only ever delivers bad news. Sofia Delgado had been hit by a delivery truck while crossing the street near her gallery in the Bronx. She died at the scene. There were no goodbyes.
No last word.
Just the sound of tires on wet asphalt and a scream that didn't echo long enough. The funeral was small. Private. Just a few close friends, former students, and the twins. Ava cried silently through the entire service. Nova didn't cry at all, but her jaw clenched so tightly that her molars ached for days. Sophia had been everything. Mother. Teacher. Shield. Without her, the world felt louder. Sharper.
Unforgiving.
In the weeks that followed, the apartment turned quiet. Too quiet. The colors on the walls dulled. The air felt heavier. Sophia's camera sat untouched on the shelf, and her studio became a room neither of them could step into without feeling hollow. Ava started sleeping with her bedroom door locked. Nova stopped eating dinner at the table. They shared a space, but lived on different planets. At first, they tried to hold on to routine. Ava continued her art classes. Nova kept up with her modeling contracts. But without Sophia's grounding presence, the cracks widened. Nova threw herself into work. Photo shoots, interviews, events. Her name was gaining traction in the fashion world not just as a model, but as a voice. She began speaking at conferences, advocating for representation, giving TEDx talks about redefining beauty. She launched an online platform called Light Within, which later grew into a non-profit supporting youth with rare genetic conditions. The public loved her. She was poised, passionate, articulate. A star. Ava withdrew. She turned down events. Stopped posting on social media. She spent more time painting, sometimes not speaking for days. Her sketches grew darker, figures lost in fog, children with hollow eyes, mirrors that reflected nothing. Nova noticed. She worried. But she didn't know how to reach her sister anymore. They'd grown up intertwined, a single unit against the world. Now, they were orbiting separate suns. One night, during a rare dinner together, Ava said quietly, "I'm thinking of leaving New York."
Nova blinked. Leaving for where? I don't know. Somewhere quiet.
Maybe New Mexico. I found an artist residency there. They work with kids who've been through trauma.
Nova pu dauner fork. You're juste gonna disappear.
I'm not disappearing. I'm trying to breathe.
Nova shook her head.
This is exactly what Mom would have done.
Ava's eyes darkened.
Don't compare me to her.
You're running. I'm surviving.
The argument ended there, but the silence that followed was worse. 2 months later, Ava packed her bags and boarded a one-way flight to Santa Fe. She didn't ask Nova to come. Nova didn't ask her to stay. Ava settled into a small adobe house on the edge of a reservation, surrounded by desert and sky. The air smelled of sage and earth. She taught painting classes at a community center for children with special needs, most of them from marginalized backgrounds. She met a social worker named Marlene who introduced her to Isaiah, a 5-year-old boy with albinism who had been bounced between foster homes his whole life. Ava adopted him within the year. Nova stayed in Brooklyn, moved into a loft in Bushwick, and expanded Light Within into a registered foundation operating in multiple states. She partnered with dermatologists, educators, and fashion brands to normalize conversations about visible difference. She was on panels, in magazines, on runways. She even made a brief appearance on late-night television. But she didn't talk about Ava. People asked. She smiled politely. We're on different paths right now. What she didn't say was that they hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years.
She saw on harpie son Instagram. A haunting canvas of 2 little girls in white dress holding in a field of mirror.
She knew immediately it was Ava's work. She stared at it for an hour. Then she closed the app. Denise Walker watched it all unfold from her small apartment above a laundromat in Detroit. Her daughters had become women the world revered. They stood on stages, graced covers, shaped discourse. But they were also fragments, shards of something that had once been whole. She kept every article.
Every interview.
She recorded Nova's TEDx talk and watched it over and over. She downloaded photos of Ava's paintings and saved them in a folder on her desktop she titled My Girls. But she had never reached out. Because what could she say?
I'm sorry he left you.
I'm sorry I was weak. I loved you but not enough to stay. Shame clung to her like a second skin. She had walked away from her babies in the middle of winter, left them in a shelter with nothing but a note. And then when the world tried to give her a second chance, when someone had inquired about adopting the girls 3 years later, she had sent a letter to Hopewell, begging them to delay. I will come back, she had written.
Please don't let them go.
But she hadn't come. She had gone deeper into survival mode, working late shifts, sleeping on buses, numbing herself with exhaustion. She told herself she would reclaim her daughters when she had something to offer. Instead, they grew up without her, became extraordinary without her. And still, she loved them. With a love that rotted in silence. That year, a British filmmaker announced a documentary, The Angel Twins, Where Are They Now? He contacted Nova first. She hesitated, then agreed, under one condition.
Don't bring up my sister. She's done with the world.
But when the filmmaker found Ava's studio in Santa Fe, she didn't slam the door. Instead, she listened. Then she looked at a photo of her and Nova as children, pressing foreheads together, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, and said, "Tell her. I remember." For the first time in almost a decade, the door to reconciliation creaked open. But some wounds don't heal easily. Some reunions demand more than time. They demand truth. And Truth was about to walk through the door, trembling, with white hair and a folded piece of paper nearly 30 years old. The empty theater smelled of dust and time. Its velvet seats had long faded from red to rust. The stage lights flickered weakly above the wooden platform where 3 cameras had been set up. A boom mic hovered overhead, still, waiting. The crew spoke in hushed tones, respectful of the silence that loomed larger than the space itself. The documentary team had chosen the location intentionally.
Neutral ground. Somewhere distant from the noise of New York and the solitude of Santa Fe. A place where history could breathe without judgment.
Ava arrived first. She stepped into the theater wearing a loose denim jacket over a linen dress, her white hair tied back in a low bun. She scanned the room quickly, eyes alert, unsure. Her fingers clutched a small canvas bag filled with brushes and charcoal pencils, an anchor, perhaps, or armor. Nova entered 10 minutes later. She wore a crisp ivory suit, her curls styled to perfection, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like punctuation marks. She didn't glance at the cameras. Her eyes locked on Ava immediately, then quickly moved past her as if they hadn't just spent the last decade apart. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ava said softly, "You still wear white." Nova's jaw tightened.
You still hid behind paint.
It wasn't meant as cruelty. But it wasn't kind either.
The crew gave them space, letting the tension settle.
The director stood just out of frame, uncertain when, or if, he should intervene. Then, without warning, a door at the side of the theater creaked open.
A woman stepped through.
Older, frail, wrapped in a faded coat and a headscarf that barely covered her white hair. In her trembling hands, she held a folded piece of yellowed paper. The twins turned in unison. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Nova froze. Denise Walker stood before them. She hadn't planned to be part of this. The director had reached out on a long shot, expecting silence or refusal. But when he mentioned Ava had agreed to the film, and Nova would be there too, Denise had said yes without thinking. Then spent 3 days trying to change her mind. Now, here she was. 34 years older. Smaller somehow. Her posture bent not just by age but by regret. No one spoke. Denise stepped forward and held out the piece of paper. "This was all I had to give," she said. "And it was never enough." Ava reached for it slowly, as if touching the note would make the moment real. She unfolded it carefully. "Please love them for me." She knew those words. She had dreamed those words. Read them so many times they were etched into her bones.
Heure en shook.
"You left us," Nova said flatly. "I know. You said you'd come back."
Il me hante tout.
"Why didn't you?" Denise swallowed hard. "Because I was afraid."
Because he had nothing.
"Because I thought if I stayed away, you'd have a better chance." Nova took a step closer, her voice rising. "You thought abandonment was protection?" "I thought the world would be cruel to you if I kept you with me. I didn't think I could fight it." Ava's voice broke through, quieter but sharper. "But we needed you. We waited."
Every night.
Denise's knees gave out, and she dropped to the floor. Her fingers clutched the note as if it could anchor her. "I lived in shame," she whispered.
Every day, he saw your face.
"I kept every article, every picture, every interview. I wasn't strong enough to face you." "You were strong enough to write a letter to the shelter telling them not to let anyone adopt us," Nova said coldly. Ava turned sharply toward her sister. "What are you talking about?" Nova pulled a folded document from her handbag and held it out. "I found this when the filmmaker gave us the records. Dated 1994. A couple from Oregon wanted to adopt us. A good family. But they were white. The shelter delayed because they got this letter from her." She looked at Denise. "You told them not to let anyone take us. Said you were coming back."
You never came. Denise's face crumpled.
"I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you went with them, you'd be experimented on, exploited. I'd seen what happens. I thought waiting was safer." Nova's voice was sharp now, a blade honed by decades of silence. We were already being exploited. Already alone. We didn't need protection. We needed a mother. Denise looked up at her daughters. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I never stopped loving you. Silence settled again, heavy and suffocating. Ava stepped forward.
She sat on the floor beside Denise, slowly, knees creaking.
She reached for the note again, and this time, read it aloud. Please love them for me. She folded it gently. They did, she said, not looking at Nova. And somehow we learned to love ourselves too. Nova's arms stayed crossed. She looked at Ava, then at their mother, and something in her face cracked. You don't get to come back and be our mother now, she said. That's not how it works. I know, Denise replied. I don't want a title.
I juste want un moment.
Nova didn't move.
Then, slowly, she walked over.
Not to Denise, but to Ava. She stood beside her sister. For a beat, they said nothing. Then Nova said, voice low, I've hated you for choosing peace while I was drowning in noise. Ava looked up. And I've envied you for being brave enough to speak when I wanted to disappear. They were no longer mirror images. They were two separate women, shaped by the same wound in different ways.
Nova sat down.
The three of them, mother and daughters, sat together for the first time in more than 3 decades. No cameras rolled.
No one gave direction.
They just sat. Later that night, the crew packed up quietly.
The director wept behind the monitor.
No one gave the closing line. Because some moments are too raw for scripts. But in the quiet, something shifted. A note folded.
A silence broken. A beginning, not an ending.
Weeks passed after the reunion in the theater, but none of them rushed to define what had happened that day. There were no declarations.
No promises.
Just a quiet unraveling of decades-old knots, slow and uncertain. Ava returned to Santa Fe. Her life there resumed gently, as if the desert had been holding her place. Isaiah ran to her when she stepped through the door, arms wide, stories tumbling from his lips about a new class pet and a painting he made that looked like the sky. She hugged him tight and stayed that way longer than usual. Something in her arms had shifted. They held not just her son, but also a weight she had finally put down. She didn't tell him everything. But she framed the old note, the one from the shelter, and hung it above her desk. Nova, back in Brooklyn, found herself less certain in the spotlight. She still ran light within, still spoke at conferences and interviews, but something had softened. The words came slower. She spoke less like a leader and more like someone searching, still learning. She began each speech with a story, not about her organization, but about 2 girls who used to hold hands under a thin blanket and whisper dreams into the dark. Denise stayed in Detroit for a while. Her apartment felt smaller now, too quiet, filled with ghosts. She still cleaned offices at night. Not because she had to anymore. Ava had quietly offered to help with rent, and Nova had already sent a check she hadn't asked for, but because she needed to do something that reminded her she was still alive. One day, she received a letter from Ava. Inside was a plane ticket to New Mexico. It wasn't an invitation. It was a beginning. Denise arrived just as the desert was blooming. She moved into the guest room of Ava's small home. It was modest but warm, filled with canvas and laughter and the smell of paint thinner and sage. At first, Denise kept her distance, unsure of how to belong. But slowly, Isaiah began calling her grandma, and her hands remembered how to braid Ava's hair on quiet Sunday mornings. They cooked together.
Painted together.
Sat on the porch at night and listened to the coyotes howl. One evening, Ava asked, "Do you regret it?" Denise didn't ask what she meant. "I regret surviving the wrong way," she said. "But I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Ava didn't reply. But she reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. Nova visited that summer. She arrived with a suitcase too big and heels too high for the dirt roads, but her smile was genuine. She stayed for 3 days. The first night, they ate on the porch, Denise, Ava, Nova, and Isaiah. No cameras. No press. Just people rediscovering what it meant to be together. Nova brought a gift, one of the early copies of her foundation's latest project, a children's book called Light Looks Like Us. It featured characters with vitiligo, birthmarks, albinism, and scars. The last page had a dedication, to the girl who stayed silent, and the girl who spoke too loud. Both of you saved me. Ava didn't cry. But she traced the dedication with her fingers long after Nova had gone to bed. Every year after that, on January 14th, the three of them met in a new place. Sometimes in Santa Fe. Sometimes in Brooklyn. Once in a cabin near Lake Michigan, where the snow fell as heavily as it had the night they were born. They brought the note with them each time. Folded.
Fragile. Style gible.
Please love them for me. At first, the tradition felt fragile too. But it held. Like threads sewn carefully into fabric, not perfect, but stronger together. The world moved on. Trends changed. New faces graced the covers of magazines. But Ava's paintings began showing in galleries across the Southwest. Her students displayed their work with pride, their faces glowing under light that no longer felt cruel. She never used the word angel in her titles. She preferred witness, storm, survivor. Nova scaled back her public schedule. She focused more on policy, on mentoring, on listening. She created a scholarship in Sofia Delgado's name for young women of color with visible differences. When asked in interviews what inspired her work, she always gave the same answer. Love that came too late, but still mattered. One fall afternoon, Ava and Nova were invited to speak at a conference together. It had been years since they'd shared a stage. The moderator asked, "How do you define forgiveness?" Ava answered first. "Forgiveness," she said, "is not forgetting. It's choosing to stop bleeding from the same wound." Nova nodded beside her. And sometimes, forgiveness doesn't look like a hug or a reunion. Sometimes, it's just being willing to sit at the same table again. That night, a photo was taken, not for a magazine, but for their own keeping. It showed three women. Ava, with paint on her hands.
Nova, with gold earring catching the light.
And Denise, smiling softly, her white hair blending with theirs. Not posed. Not curated. Just laughing. Years later, when the documentary aired, viewers around the world wept. The final scene was not dramatic.
No music swelled.
No speech echoed. It was a simple shot of the three of them walking along a quiet beach in Oregon. Their footprints side by side.
The ocean behind them.
The narrator read their final message. To anyone who has ever felt unwanted.
You are not broken.
You were just waiting for the right eyes to see you.
The film won awards.
But that wasn't the victory. The victory was quieter. It lived in Sunday mornings, in children's drawings, in Isaiah's voice calling grandma across a sunlit yard. It lived in the absence of bitterness. In the decision to keep showing up. They were never angels. They were daughters who forgave. And that was rarer than beauty.